You ever been invisible in a room full of people who think their laugh is louder than your life? Picture this: a high-rise club on the 36th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, brunch presented like ritual, and a room smelling of champagne and hubris. The kind of place where men in crisp suits treat the world like a spreadsheet and people like decimals. That's where my story starts. Except I wasn't a guest, I was the one carrying the trays, and for most of them I might as well have been the wallpaper. Act 1. Hook 3 sentences to pull you in. He asked loud enough that half the table heard and the other half laughed. I have 50 million, sweetheart. What would you do with that A savings account at the welfare office? He waved a $100 bill like a remote control. The room chuckled and everyone expected the usual: a nervous smile, a curt nod, silence. But the question landed like an invitation, and I was tired of being invisible. My name's Maya Rivera, and 3 years before that Saturday I had a different life. Ivy League econ degree, a job at a major investment firm doing risk analysis, a future that smelled like coffee and corner offices. Then life happened. My aunt, the woman who raised me, collapsed with a stroke. Medical bills stacked like bricks, choices that snapped careers in half. I quit sold, my belongings moved into a tiny apartment that doubled as a hospital room, and I learned how fast the world forgets a person who pauses to care. The Meridian Club, no, not Meridian anymore, call it the Aurora Club, is the kind of place where membership cards cost more than my rent used to, where people eat deals with their eggs, and the servers are trained to be seen only when someone needs another glass. They called themselves power brunchers, and they were loud about it. Garrett-like men who believed that if you didn't own a yacht, you didn't deserve a seat at the table. I worked there because the tips were good enough to keep my aunt on medicine, and I learned a new survival skill: make yourself small, make yourself fast. Swallow the insult and do it again next Saturday. But the thing about people who look down is they forget to lock the doors on their conversations. They forget to mute their phones. They forget that facts live in footnotes. I kept my old habits: late-night reading of financial statements, sneaking time between shifts to pull SEC filings, marking weird patterns in a dog-eared notebook. I listened to the same group every week, to the same voice preaching the gospel of the next big thing: a tech company everyone called Nova Systems, ticker NVS, and I saw small things bloom into contradictions. Stocks moved after TV appearances, trades followed the applause, and the same fund would quietly shed shares right after the price spiked. It was a pattern. It was a crime, or at least it smelled like one. Act 2. The turn. Then came the Saturday that flipped the script. Table 12, high spirits. A man named Lawrence Pembroke, think of him as the avatar of arrogance, decided to make a show. He singled me out because that's how men like him feel powerful, and asked for financial advice the way a bully asks a question to humiliate. Maya, with 50 million. What would you do? Open a savings account. He laughed, the table laughed, a woman in pearls tutted that some people didn't know their place. You know the choreography. I stood there, bottle of champagne in hand, heart doing its own math. He tossed 100 on the table like spare change. He wanted me small, he wanted me grateful. Instead, I looked at him and said, "Sell NVS. Everything. Before Tuesday." Silence crashed like glass. He blinked, then barked, "Sell. What, you got a brokerage account hidden in your apron?" The room expected me to stammer. I didn't. I had been living in the spreadsheets for 3 years. I had the numbers. "Look," I said, and I started to talk in the language that had once won me a seat in a room that mattered. Their accounts receivable grew 320%, while reported revenue grew 10% last quarter. That's channel stuffing. Their CFO sold $11 million last month under a 10b5 plan set up 46 days before the sale. Weird timing. And their auditors resigned quietly the quarter before. They don't resign unless they're scared. I pointed to my printouts to the tiny footnote on page 67 that said, "Informal inquiry ongoing." People at the next table leaned in. Someone tapped at their phone. The first snickers turned into the breath that precedes a storm. Pembroke's face went from amused to furious. He stood all inches taller and all the more ridiculous for it and offered me a wager to save face. If NVS closed above 150 by Friday, I would climb a chair and apologize. If not, he would donate $100,000 to a financial literacy program I named. The room loved the theater. They didn't see the stakes, they only saw spectacle. I went to the kitchen and my hands shook because you don't bet a lifetime on a gut feeling. You bet it when you've traced the dots for months. Derek, a line cook who'd watched me carry shame with a tray for 2 years, hissed, "Don't do this. Maya, he'll ruin you." I thought of my aunt of the years I shelved my resume and learned accounts receivable like lullabies. I thought of the kids in my neighborhood who thought money was something you didn't question. I went back out. Act 3, the climax and fallout. I walked to the table like I was walking into a jury box. My voice was steady. I laid out the pattern one piece at a time with printouts, dates, filings. Not gossip, not bravado. Harold Lynn, an elderly professor who'd been coming to Aurora for months and had quietly admired my ability to translate balance sheets into plain speech, stood up and vouched for me. The old man's credibility was the wedge. Suddenly, I wasn't just a waitress. I was a person reading the public record out loud, and the room started to rearrange itself around that fact. And then the universe decided to help with timing. The TV above the bar flashed a red banner. SEC opens formal inquiry into Nova Systems trading halted. The anchor read it like a funeral dirge. Phones lit up. Brokers cursed a man at Garrett's, sorry Pembroke's. Table pushed back his chair, stunned. "I put my retirement in this," he said, the color drained from his face. Pembroke tried to roar, to threaten to smear, but the air had shifted. The crowd that fed his ego now fed on his fall. You should have seen his face when I walked up to him and said, "Quiet. You asked for financial advice. So, here's lesson 1. The arrogance of thinking people are numbers is exactly what gets you counted." Then I told the story I never planned to tell, how his deals had gutted a small medical supply company in New Jersey where my uncle worked, how that company's collapse shook my aunt into a hospital bed, how my family had bled to pay for the care he'd evicted with his strategy. The room went still. For a man who'd traded lives like commodities, hearing a name, a face, a consequence, that was new. The next week, NVS cratered. The videos of the confrontation hit tens of millions of views. Journalists I had subtly fed with subpoenas and filings ran front-page stories. Pembroke's fund faced redemptions lawsuits stacked, and within weeks regulators executed searches. His life of private jets and late-night smokes became a legal calendar and a bail hearing. He lost his freedom, his suit sizes, and finally his audience. But here's the part people forget in the dopamine rush of seeing a giant topple. Consequences are not always tidy, and victories don't fix everything. The small business that collapsed wasn't resurrected because he went to jail. Pensions weren't instantly restored. Families didn't unlose years. I could make a center with the settlement money, a place to teach people what a footnote meant to teach them to ask why. And I did. I opened a financial literacy clinic in a brick storefront, and we taught people how to read filings, how to ask brokers hard questions, how to spot the holes where predatory actors slide through. So, what's the takeaway? That the person refilling your water might be smarter than you think. Sure, that systems can be gamed by those with loud voices and fewer scruples. Absolutely. That sometimes one person can make a difference if they know where to look and are willing to speak. Maybe. But it's messy, and justice is rarely as cinematic as the clips make it look. It takes documentation, patience, alliances, a journalist who will run the story, and the stubbornness to stand up when no one else will. I tell you this because stories like mine are not just entertainment. They're instruction. If you have a moment of doubt, read the footnote. Ask the hard question. Don't defer to someone because of a suit or a shout. If you were ever made to feel invisible, know this: being unseen doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you have a view they can't reach. Now it's your turn. Was what I did right or reckless? Could turning a personal vendetta into public exposure be justified when the stakes are lives and livelihoods? Tell me about a time you were underestimated and how you reacted. Did you shout back? Did you quietly collect evidence? Did you walk away? Drop your story in the comments. Argue with me if you want. I read them all. And if this moved you even a little, hit like, subscribe for more stories where the underdog doesn't stay under, and share this with someone who still thinks the suit makes the mind.